I needed to be able to make make music on demand, and that meant often learning songs, but much more often meant being able to come up with guitar parts that worked in a band setting or with other instruments. So that's what this is all about. It's about understanding every harmonic and melodic sound that the guitar can make, and really grokking it and being able to do creative things with the notes on the guitar. That's what this is all about, putting chords and scales together so you can do cool sounding things, and so you can know your way around the guitar, find the notes that give you the sounds you want. So it all starts with learning the notes on the guitar. There are 7 letters in the musical alphabet: A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And I'm going to zoom this up just a little bit, I can see it better. There are 6 strings on the guitar. So the thinnest string that's closest to the ground is an E. Second string is a B. Third string is G. 4 is D. 5 is A. And the 6th string, again, the thickest string, the one that's farthest from the ground, is, again, another E. The way the notes work on each string is you count up alphabetically, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, start over at G, and begin again. So on each string, the way it works is the notes B and C and E and F are always 1 fret apart, and all of the other notes are 2 frets apart. Okay, so every other note going from A to B, that's 2 frets. Then B to C is 1 fret, C to D is 2 frets, D to E, and this is true on any string. So just B and C and E and F are 1 fret apart. All the others are 2 frets. So if you look at, for example, the 5th string, that starts on an A. The open 0 fret is an A. So 2 frets above that is a B. And then 1 fret above the B is a C. Remember, C is always 1 fret higher than B. And counting up from that alphabetically, the 3rd fret, 2 frets higher than C, is a D. 2 frets higher than that is an E. And 1 fret higher than the E. Remember, E and F are always 1 fret apart. So F is at the 8th fret. G ends up being at the 10th fret. And then A again is at the 12th fret. So you always notice that 12 frets above any starting note, you have the same note again. And if you look at this little grid here, this tells you all the notes. Basically, if you know the starting notes, you can remember those starting notes a couple different ways. Starting on the 6th string, every ape does get bananas every day, or Eddie ate dynamite good by Eddie. A couple of these mnemonics that you can remember. Eat a darn good breakfast every day. So that's a couple quick ways you can remember the notes of the open strings that start on the 6th string. And then this little grid shows you what all the notes are if you count up following that same set of guidelines. E to F is always 1 fret, and then so if you're starting on open, F is going to be on the 1st fret of the 1st string, and then 2 frets above that is G. This goes through the entire pattern, starting on the open string and then up to the 12th fret, so you can find all the notes. You notice that in between all those notes that are 2 frets apart, we have an empty fret that doesn't have a name. So the way you name those is you have a sharp symbol. This thing looks like a pound symbol, pound sign. So for example, between E and F, at that 2nd fret there, you have what can either be called an F moved up, that F sharp, or the pound sign, F sharp, or it can be called G moved down, G flat. And you use the flat symbol here to lowercase b to indicate that a note is moved down 1 fret. So note at the 2nd fret between F and G can be called either F sharp or G flat. Same thing here between the G and the A. That 4th fret can be called either G sharp or A flat. And 6th fret, A sharp or B flat, and so on. B sharp is a C, or a C flat is a B. They're the same note, called enharmonic notes. Okay, so there's a little grid that shows you all of those in between notes too. F and G in between can be called either F sharp or G flat. And you should notice these couple things. Like we already said, the pattern starts over every 12 frets. So if you start on the 0 fret, you go up to the 12th fret, you get back to an E. Start at the A, at the 0 fret, the open string, at the 12th fret, and there's a double dot at the 12th fret that kind of helps you see that. But that's true for any note. So 12 frets above F, 13th fret, there's another F, and so on. Those notes that sound the same, have the same pitch names, but are at different registers are called octaves. So you can hear, for example, an adult sing something like that, and then a child can sing, and those notes are the same, just in different octaves, different registers. They have the same note names, and they sound the same. They go together as almost as unisons, but they're in different registers. One of the other things you'll see, you might have seen this from tuning, between the strings, on every string except the third string and second string and third string, you have 5 frets between unison notes. So we started here on B and we counted up to E. This E note on the second string, 5th fret, is the same as the E note on the open first string. And you can see that pattern goes on. F at the first fret is the same as F at the second fret. This D here on the 4th string, for example, is the same as the 5th fret on the 5th string. And same for all the other notes. The only place that's different is on the second string. The notes are 4 frets away. The second string and the third string are 4 frets apart. So the B here, for example, is the same. The open second string is the same as the third string 4th fret. And that's just the way the guitar is tuned. It's set up that way. If you learn the traditional way of tuning, you learn that you play this 5th fret here and that you tune the 5th string to it. Play the 5th fret on the 5th string, you tune the 4th string. The only one that's different is you tune the second string to the 4th fret of the 3rd string, and that's why it works that way. Okay, so if you look at these patterns, you can start a major scale on any note. If you start on a C, and this major scale is the sound do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. If you're familiar with that old traditional sound, or you recognize that. That's just the natural notes. If you start on C and go to another C, counting up each of the natural notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, from C to C, that forms the pattern known as the major scale. So in between C and D, there's 2 frets, D to E is 2 frets, E to F is 1 fret, and you get this little pattern of whole and half steps, those 2 frets between all the notes except E and F and B and C. So it's whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, 2 frets, 2 frets, 1 fret, 2 frets, 2 frets, 2 frets, and 1 fret. So if you go anywhere on the guitar, start on a C, for example, on the 5th string, 3rd fret, count up those notes. Here it is. Here's my 3rd fret. Here's the C, here's the D, here's an E, go to the F, G, A, B, C. I can start on the 6th string at the 8th fret. Here we are, 6th string, 8th fret. And I went from the 6th string, 8th fret all the way up to the 6th string, 20th fret. If I start on the 3rd string, so here on the 3rd string at the 5th fret, and walk up the same way, find all those natural notes, I'll get that same C major scale sound, and so on. So basically, if we replace each of these letter names, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that'll give us the interval pattern that's used to create a major scale. So if you take those notes and recognize where they are in relation to the starting note, for example, the D is 2 frets above 1. The 3rd note, 1, 2, 3, is always 4 frets above the starting note, and so on. As you go up that scale, you can define these things that are called intervals, the numbers of the major scale, by how far those notes are above the starting note. So if we take those notes now, put them on any of those places where we start on C, you get that same little interval pattern, so that a 2 is always 2 frets above 1, a 3 is always 1, 2, 3 is always 4 frets above 1, and so on. We give names to these numbers. If you start on the starting note and you go 0 frets, that's called a unison. That's the same note. 2 frets, that's called a major second or a whole step. You go 4 frets, that's called a major third, and so on. So you see these labels here. Oh, we're just going to use the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 is called the octave. And if you take those numbers and start on any other note and play the exact same pattern of frets, so So whole, half, 2 frets, 2 frets, 1 fret, 2 frets, 2 frets, 2 frets, and 1 fret. Or if you take those numbers and count the same number of frets for each number, you'll come up with the same sound, just starting on a different note. So if I start, for example, on A, and I do that same pattern of 2 frets, 2 frets, 2 frets, 1 fret, 2 frets, 2 frets, 2 frets, 1 fret, you get a pattern that sounds like do, re, mi, fa, sol, ti, do, all the way through. And you can do that on any note. If we start on B, you still get that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do sound. And you end up with a different set of notes. You don't get just the natural notes anymore. If you start on that A, you have to play A, B, and that third note lands on a C sharp instead of a C. The fourth note lands on a D, the fifth note lands on E, sixth note lands on F sharp, seventh note lands on G sharp, and the eighth note, seventh note lands on G sharp, and the eighth note, the octave, lands back on A. So that's how we get the notes of the major scale. And I've got them all written out here. If you want to take a look, a detailed look, you can see what all those notes are and how they're found. If you start on the 5th fret for the A, count up using that major scale pattern, you'll get these notes, and so on and so forth for all of the other scales. And you notice in most of the scales, some of them have sharps and some of them have flats. The way you figure that out is basically you want to have one of every note. So you'd want to call, if you're starting on D, D, E, you want an F type note, so you're going to call it F sharp, and then G, and then an A, and a B, and instead of calling that next note D flat, you call it C sharp, because we want a C type note. We want one of every letter in each key. That's why some of the keys have sharps and some have flats. Like if we start on F, we want one of every letter. So we start on E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. We want to have a B flat there instead of what are we talking about? A sharp here. Instead of an A sharp, we want a B flat because we don't want two A notes. Okay, so that's how that works. And that's just a reference there to help you see how this all goes together. Okay, now one of the most important things to get here, and this is going to sort of form the foundation of everything that's really practical on the guitar. Instead of just taking those notes on one string and having to go up 12 frets to find all those notes on one string, you can take each group of notes and move them. Remember, we have equivalent notes, those unison notes, on the adjacent string. So we can take this F, G, and A and stick it up here. So instead of doing C, D, E, and then going up the same string going F, G, and A, we can take that F, G, and A and play it on the 4th string. So at the same position, we get those same notes. Instead of walking up the string, we just kind of drop them down the next string, play them 5 frets lower on the next string, and then we can do the same thing with this B and C. We can move it onto the next string again. So now we get the exact same note. So here it is on one string. Here it is moved across the strings. That one up from the 5th string to the 3rd string. And you can do that again on any string. You start on the 6th string, and there are different ways that you can find those notes and kind of separate them. So for example, instead of putting this C, D, and E all on the 6th string, you take that E and put it over here on the 5th string. And again, this A that's on the 5th string can be moved over here to the 4th string. You get the same set of notes. So here's this pattern. This is what it sounds like. And then here's this pattern. Sounds the same. And you can do it starting with any finger. There's that next pattern, and so on. You can start on any string. And what we get, if we do that, is a bunch of little scale shapes kind of written out all over the fretboard. And that's what this next section is. Again, just replacing the C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C with numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you get all these different ways of playing scales, starting on any string. And so one way to think about the fretboard, and we're going to use these numbers to build everything, all the chords, all the scales that you ever need, all the chord progressions, everything, is do what we did before. Just take those notes that we had, all the natural notes on every string, we saw this already, and just replace those numbers. So this natural note pattern becomes an interval pattern that lets us find all of the numbers anywhere. You can start on any C, go up to any other C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. You can start here, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, or you can go here, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and those are all the numbers 1 through 8. 1 through, remember, 1 is the same as 8, the unison, or an octave. So this little fingering diagram, here it is again a little more in a little more compact way, is the absolute most important finger pattern to learn on the guitar. This helps you find every interval pattern possible on the guitar, and it goes from octave to octave, so it just starts over again. And just like we did with the notes of the C scale to create all the other keys, you can put this number 1 on any other note, and you'll find all the notes in the major scale, all the intervals that you need to build all the other chords by memorizing where those numbers are. Okay, so here this is the same diagram. This is the most important thing you're going to see, and every single thing in music theory comes from this little diagram on the guitar. If you do this on other instruments, you basically just have to memorize the notes of each major scale, and that's how you find the intervals. On the guitar, it's a little bit easier to memorize. You can see some things here. There are always certain intervals next to each other on adjacent strings, so you'll always notice like 1 and 4 are always adjacent to each other, and 5 and 1 going this way are always adjacent, and 7 and 3, and so on. You'll notice that on the second and third strings, they're always 1 fret apart. So if we find a 1 and a 4, for example, on the second and third string, they're always going to be skewed by 1 fret, and that's because the tuning again is off by 1 fret. Remember, the second string is tuned to the 4th fret, where all the other strings are tuned 5 frets apart. So all these intervals that, like 6 and 2, are always together on the third string and the second string, they're always off by 1 fret. It's going to figure really importantly as you get to know more on the fretboard. So for example, here's a 2 and 5 on all of the other strings. If you have a 2 and a 5, they're right next to each other. There's a 2 and a 5 on the second and third string, or the third and second string there. You've got 1 fret in between them. Okay, so here's a diagram. You can download the PDF of this. This is something you need to commit to memory. Get to know those fingering patterns. This will print out on one full page. That PDF will fill up the page so you can learn it and memorize it. That's the basis of all of this dry stuff. Everything up into this point was just to kind of show you how the instrument works, how the notes are put together, how scales are made. This is what we're going to actually use to create everything else in music. So we have some other scale types, and the way you can do this is, for example, you take those numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then start over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You keep doing that anywhere. And if you leave out a couple of those numbers, you get what's called a major pentatonic scale. Major pentatonic is 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. So you're leaving out a 4 and you're leaving out a 7. And if you do that, instead of this, you get. Oops. Okay, so those are the numbers 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. And if you play that in any place, I just did that starting at the 8th fret. If you've seen the pentatonic scale, the pentatonic scales before, and you're playing, that was the second position, starting on the 8th fret. I could also do that starting with my pinky on the 8th fret of the 6th string, and play all those numbers again. I'm going to get a different scale. And so all of the possible ways you can play major pentatonic are just those numbers found within that big fingering pattern above. Same thing with the minor pentatonic. If you take the major scale notes, for example, I'll start on the A on the 6th string and play the major scale notes. And I take that, for example, play the notes. Let's do for example, the Dorian scale first. I'll take those major scale notes and I'm going to flat the 3. So instead of playing a 3, I'm going to flat it, move it down 1 fret. And instead of playing the 7, I'm going to play flat 7. That gives me a Dorian scale, and I can do that in any octave anywhere. So that was it starting on an A. Now if you look at the minor pentatonic, that's just a Dorian scale without a couple notes, without the 2 and without the 6. So if you play those same notes that we just did and take out the 2 and then take out the 6, do a flat 7 and then start it over, you get the notes of a minor pentatonic scale. And you can do that in any position on the guitar as long as you're playing just those numbers out of that big fingering diagram. You get what sounds like a minor pentatonic. And again, here's the blues scale. It's the same thing as minor pentatonic, but with an added flat 5 note. So here's my numbers: 1, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 7, and 1. If I add a flat 5 to that, here's the flat 5 and flat 7, then do it again. Flat 5, 5, flat 7, 1, keep going. And that gives me a blues scale. So you get a really different sound that sounds totally different than. And that's the basis of all music theory. You can play any scale by just learning the numbers, and you can get any kind of weird sound or interesting sound by playing different interval patterns. And that's the whole key of music theory. That's how we define harmonic sounds, combinations of sounds that have a certain flavor. So if I play this major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, and this time we'll flat the 3 and we'll flat the 6, and you end up with something like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, flat 6, and then 7, and then start over again. That sounds very different then, and that's the way all these things work. If you take any of these scales and play those numbers anywhere in that big fingering pattern above, you will get the scales that you expect, the sounds that you expect. It doesn't matter where you do it, what root note you start on, they will always have that same characteristic sound no matter where you start. And so here, this is a little bit of the fingering patterns. Every single thing you're ever going to see, every chord, every scale, is just a little portion of that big fingering pattern that we did above, the whole, this big monster finger pattern, that 12-fret finger pattern. So we're taking a couple little chunks of it here. One starting on the 6th string, so going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. And then one starting on the 5th string, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on, with a couple extra notes on the 6th string. So it's just a little chunk of the fretboard. Here I give a little chunk of the notes so you can kind of know where you are if you're going to start this. For example, say you want to do an F major scale, you put your F, put your 1 on that 1st fret on the 6th string, and you can keep going and go back down as long as you're playing those. I just played those numbers starting on the 1st fret. It gives me an F major scale. If I go up to the 6th fret, I'm going to get a B flat major scale, and so on. And if we do that anywhere on the fretboard, we'll get the scale that we want using the numbers that we want. So that gives us a fingering pattern that looks like this. I play those numbers, and that gives us these little scale diagrams that you've probably seen in books that have 10,000 pages, and other books that show you, for example, 10,000 chords. You don't need those books when you learn harmony. This is everything you need. And so there's a couple fingering patterns for the major scale, and here are some fingering patterns for major pentatonic, again, just by taking out the right notes. So if we look at the diagram above, major scale is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and major scale leaves out the 4 and leaves out the 7. So if you leave out that 4, you leave out that 7, you get this fingering pattern here. And that's what the diagram ends up looking like. So you can see there's a 2nd position, there's a 1st position major pentatonic if you've seen those in the past. Same thing with the minor pentatonic. We can take the numbers, flat the 3, get rid of the 2, take a 4, take a 5, get rid of the 6, flat the 7, and you end up with those notes. That's what the notes are if you look at the original scale diagram, and you get this fingering pattern there. The R's are the roots. Okay, and there's some blues scales, Mixolydian scales, and this, again, was just 2 chunks of the fretboard. There are basically 5 common chunks. This is called the E shape, and this is called the A shape. We're going to get to that later. There are 5 chunks that are usually labeled C, A, G, E, and D. It's one common way to break up the fretboard, but this is just a couple of them. It's the E shape and the A shape. Okay, so this goes through how to find all the scales. So if you just know where the numbers are, and you know what the formula is for any scale, you can play it instantly without having to memorize scales. This lets you see how it works, but you don't need to memorize these things. All you need to memorize is this big interval pattern that goes from root to note. It's basically this thing, from root note to root note, all the way up and down the fretboard. And right now, again, we're just using this little chunk of it for the 6th string, using this little bit of it, and we're using this little bit of it. So you can see we're covering most of the fretboard with those chunks, but there are other ways to break this up. You could, for example, go from here to here and find all your numbers that way, starting on the root note, maybe in your pinky instead of in your pointer finger. So learning this diagram, whether you look at it sideways this way or up and down like a chord diagram, is the most important part of learning how to do this and understanding where you are on the fretboard and how to make scales and how to make chords. Okay, so there's some things you can do. Like I said, this is meant to be a practical guide. It's not just a dry theory text. And the most important part of this video and this whole series that I'm going to put together here is doing the practical things. So the point of learning these scales is that you can make some sounds with them. And you want to be able to do things with the scales. To make melodies, you need to do You need to be able to move around the scales in all sorts of different ways. So this tiny little bit of the text is the absolute most important part. And what it is, it shows you, for example, in any scale, it doesn't have to be just the natural notes, it could be whatever notes you're working with. You can practice these patterns. So this is a 4-note descending sequence. It starts on 1, it goes back down the scale. So say for example we're in major. If I go from 1 down to 7 to 6 and 5, then I start on the next note, lowest note. After 1 I start the next group on 7. Then I start on 6 and keep going. You get a sequence. And so on. You can do the same thing going up. You start on major scale and go up. So you have, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, and 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. And work up that way. And you can do all sorts of other patterns. So for example, I have written out here 1, 7, 6, 5. So we could take, for example, 1, 1, 7, 6, 5, and then going up 2, 1, 7, 6, and then going and so on. So you can practice any sort of pattern. You can do ascending patterns, descending patterns. You can do 3-note patterns. So 1, 7, 6, 7, 6, 5, 6, 5, 4, and so on. You can do it ascending. And so on. You can jump and skip in thirds. So of course you could skip up. And that's what's going to let you create melodies. Being able to do these kinds of sequence patterns will help you find different pathways through the scales. And each of those little pathways, any part of them can be a little part of a melody. You want to work not just on consecutive notes going down, but on bigger leaps, for example, the thirds. This is a pattern where you jump down, then back up. So you see things like... I'm sorry. Let's try this again. Occasionally I make a mistake here. And you can also do bends. So for example, you can take the second note. If we're doing a major scale, see like this. There's your 2. So that was a bend on 2, going down to 2, and then going down to 1. Then we can do a bend on 3, bend on 4, and so on. You can do a bend and release and pull off on 2, pull off to 1, go 7, 1. The same thing. Work through the scale like that. You can do pedal patterns. So this one looks like, let's see. And you can take the 5th. So there, I'm taking 1, going 7, back to 1, then 6 and back to 1, then 5 and back to 1, and 4 and back to 1, and 3 and back to 1, 2, and so on. We're going to do a lot more with arpeggio patterns as we get into chords, but you can take every other note. So 1, 3, 5, 7, then 3, 5, 7, 1, and then so on. Go through the scale like that. So, oops, and so on, and play through those numbers so that you get a totally different set of leaps. One of the things you can do is, instead of just going down a scale, so for example, if you're in the pentatonic scale, you can jump across the strings. So here I'm in the 5th fret, I'm doing a first position pentatonic, and instead of just playing down the scale, you want to be able to jump across the strings. It's not necessarily a sequence, because a lot of times the intervals will change, and it's not necessarily a bar. I'm not just kind of grabbing notes on each adjacent string at the same fret. I'm staying in scale and trying to grab little bits. So jumping around and skipping around the scale and learning to just jump between the strings instead of going up and down helps you build melodic skips instead of straight scalar sequences. You can also put other notes in. For example, we saw like a little blues thing, but you can take a pentatonic scale and put all the in-between notes in. Just based on fingering patterns, you know, if you have notes that are 2 frets apart, put the note in between. If you have notes that are 4 frets apart, put the notes that are in between. Or go on one side. If you have 2 notes that are 3 frets apart, you can go a fret above and kind of jump out of the scale and back into it. Okay, so the next little thing here is all about, we're going to start using this to build chords. It's all about the equivalent names. So if you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you keep going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you'll see that the 8th note is where the numbers start over again. So 8 is the same as 1. If you're in a C major, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, that 1 is the same as 8. So 2 is the same as 9. And you're going to notice that especially the ones we really want are 2 is the same as 9, 4 is the same as 11, and 6 is the same as 13. Those are called the extensions. There's some names for each of those. As we build chords, you're going to use those numbers to build what we call extended chords. So we're going to jump into chords now and talk a little about the basics of how to build chords. We've seen how to build scales. The difference between scales and chords generally is scales are typically successions of notes. Chords are combinations of notes. And we have some formulas just like we did for scales. If you put together different intervals, you're going to create chords that have different characteristic sounds. So a power chord is the simplest. If you start on a C and count to 5, put those notes together, 1 and 5, you get what's called a power chord. You usually see that with some distortion. Okay, so all those power chords I just played were just root notes with a 5th above. So on the guitar, they have the same fingering pattern because on any string which is 5 frets apart from the other string, you're going to have the 5th interval at the same location in relation to the root. A major triad is a root, a 3rd, and a 5th. So count the scale 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Root, 3rd, and 5th. If I play that starting on C, we get a C, an E, and a G. And any combination of those 3 notes, C, E, G, C, E, G, C, is a major chord. Here's a C, a G, a C, an E starting on the 5th string. Here's a C, an E, a G, and a C starting on the 4th string. Here's a G, a C, an E, a G, and a C, and here's maybe another C. So any combination of those notes is a C chord. We can do that anywhere on the fretboard. As long as you get those 3 notes, you've got the same intervals anywhere on the fretboard. You get the same characteristic sound. And just like with the scales, if we change one of those notes, instead of getting 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 1, 3, and 5, I change that 3rd note. It's the most powerful idea in all music theory and every kind of music. The most practical thing to understand is that you get a different sound, a different characteristic sound. That major chord sounds happy. If I flat the 3rd, it sounds sad. And any place that I play those 3 notes in the key of C, again, instead of a C, an E, and a G, I'm playing now a C, an E flat, and a G. And the way I'm thinking about this is I'm just looking for those numbers on the fretboard. Instead of having a 3, I'm moving that note 3 down a fret. As long as I know that interval pattern, I can play any of these chords anywhere on the fretboard. Now there are common ways that you see these chords kind of fingered on the guitar because there's only so many ways you can really do it comfortably. So you see the most common fingerings, you know, like maybe a bar at the 8th fret or an open C chord. But those aren't the only ways. You can jump up, you could tap the notes and anywhere on the fretboard and you'll get the C major sound. And if I flat that 3rd note, or if I'm doing this and I do this, I get that minor sound. Okay? And the same is true for all the other formulas. A dominant 7th, or what we call a 7th chord most often, has a root, a 3rd, a 5th, and a flat 7. So if I arrange that in a different way, I might get a root here, a fifth here, maybe a flat 7 here, a third here, a flat 7 here. Any combination of those intervals anywhere. Here's a root, a fifth, a flat 7th, a third, and another fifth. That was starting on the fifth string. And any combination of those notes will give me a C7 sound. Okay, so same is true for all the other types of chords. There's a thing called a major seventh, which is just like what we just did, just instead of a flat 7, it's got a natural 7. 1, 3, 5, natural 7, so it's a C, an E, a G, and a B. Put that anywhere on the guitar. Any combination of those gives that same kind of characteristic, sort of sweet jazzy sound. Really relaxed kind of sound. Any combination of that will give you a different voicing of the chords, but the same notes. Okay, so you see there's a minor 7th, that sounds like this. We take the root, the flat, or the 5th, and the flat 7, put those somewhere, and you get a sound like this. And that gives you a totally different kind of characteristic harmony. It's called a sonority, and it's different. The sonority is defined by those intervals. So this is a dominant 7th. Sounds bluesy. Here's a minor 7th. Is that kind of funky, cool, not quite sad minor, but interesting minor. Here's a half diminished. That's a root, flat third, a flat 5th, and a flat 7th. And this diminished sound sounds like this. So very different. In fact, every possible different sound that you can get in music is made by putting together different combinations of those intervals. And if you go down here, I did the same thing I did with the scales. I kind of took the most common places to find these numbers based on the 6th string and based on the 5th string. And here I've got a bunch of different fingerings for the actual chords. So you can play a major 7th by grabbing the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. This is something really important to learn if you want to do different kinds of chords. There's a dominant 7th. Here's a minor 7th. Here's a half diminished 7th. Here's the dominant or diminished 7th. Here's a dominant 7th with a sharped 5th. That's what all these diagrams were down here. And you can see how each of those chords were built by looking up at this little formula set that shows you how to play each of those types and just finding them, plugging the notes into these couple little diagrams. And you can do it either on the 6th string using this little chunk right here, or you can do it on the 5th string using this little chunk right there. And this gives you all these different chords. And now here I have a little song that basically takes each of the chords in Autumn Leaves. So you have a D minor 7th. That's going to be start on a D and find the intervals in a minor 7th chord. So those were all written out above there. Start on a G and play a 7th chord. Start on an A and play a major 7th, F major 7th, B. This little circle with a line through it means half diminished. E7 all means sharp the 5th or flat the 5th. You can also sharp the 9 or flat the 9, minor 7th and minor 7th. So if we go to each of those root notes, so I start on a D on the 6th string. Let's take a look at the actual. These are written out using the diagrams that were above. These comes from these chunks that were written out above. I go to the 10th fret and find a D and play that minor 7th fingering, or I go to the 5th string and play that minor 7th fingering. Now I find a G on the 6th string 3rd fret and find that 7th chord, or I go to the 10th fret and find a G, or I go to a C at the 8th fret and make a major shape. I go to the 5th string 3rd fret and make a major shape. So this is all defined by those couple little diagrams. Here's the F major 7 going on each string, and here's an E, or here's another E. See what I did here. Actually, I did this one. So you put those together, you get a chord progression. This is all the 6th string roots. That was using the 6th string here, the 6th string here, the 6th string shape here, and so on for each of the chords. Now here it is using the 5th string shapes. I can mix those as I want. I can do the D minor like this, G like this and this. Here's a C using a couple. Here's an F, and B. And so that's a little more jazzy thing to cover some of these more jazzy chords. But we're not going to do just jazz stuff here. We're going to stick to really mainstream styles of music. These are some of the common shapes that you're going to see for a regular bar chord: major, minor, and 7th. Major, minor, and 7th on the 5th string. This is what they look like. And we can play other types of chords here too. This goes through how you would create, for example, a dominant 7 with a sharp 5 and a flat 9. Dominant 7th is 1, 3, 5, flat 7. And so if we sharp the 5 and flat the 9, we're going to have that same chord pattern, except the 5 is going to be sharped and the 9 is going to be flatted. So you get a 1, 3, sharp 5, flat 7, and 9. For example, a major 9th with a sharp 11. Remember, 9 is the same as 2, 11 is the same as 4, and 13 is the same as 6. So you only need to know where those numbers are up to 7, and just learn to replace 9 with a 2, and 11 with a 4, and a 13 with a 6. So if we look at, for example, this major 7th, I got a root, a 3rd, a 5th, a 7th here, a 9th, and a sharp 11. And there are some fingerings here for how you would find those chords. Again, just picking out notes. There's some other types of chords that you'll see. Sus chords. When you see a sus, that means change the 3 to a 4. So for example, here's a major chord. If I change that 3 to a sharp to a 4, it sounds like this. 3 going to 4. You can do that on any chord. So you can move that around. The first one on G, I did that one on F. And I'm playing the same intervals. All that chord is here's a major chord. 1, 5, 1, 3, 5, and 1. I'm changing that 3 there. 1, 5, 1, 3 to a 4. Here it is back on major. It's a sus chord. Sus 2 means change the 3 to a 2. So for example, if I'm doing a D chord here, here's my 3. If I change that 3 to a 2, I get this. If I go to a sus, change the 3 to a 4, I heard that kind of thing in guitar playing. And so there's some other formulas here that you want to memorize if you want to learn how to play more chords. And there's a big, long example here that shows you exactly how to do this. I resized my screen here so it kind of fell off of the screen. But these diagrams will show you exactly how to play those chords if you don't size it up too big. And so you go through some. There's a little blues progression that has more like. And so on. So you get some kind of interesting blues sounds. And I'm a programmer. I like to do a lot of these computer support things for this sort of work. You can download this program here, and it will create chords using the patterns that you learned so far, and show you how to play any chord that you put in, any chord progression that you put in. It will print out a really nice graphic printout of any of the chords using exactly those patterns that you've looked at so far. I did this for I've had a lot of students over the years in high school jazz bands that need to learn how to play those kind of chords really quick, and that's a really helpful little program. If you download it, it'll show you very easily where everything is with a root note on the 6th string and a root note on the 5th string. Okay, so you probably heard about the caged patterns. Caged patterns is just a way of breaking up this full interval pattern, the full 6th string interval pattern. So if you look at the chords that most guitarists learn in the beginning, these open chords, things like a C, a G, a D, E, those chords are drawn, they're created from the interval pattern that you learned, that big, full 12-fret interval pattern, by pulling out the notes 1, 3, and 5 from all the possible places on the guitar that work naturally. So for example, we take our 5th string C here at the 3rd fret on the 5th string and get all the notes. The 1, this 3, that 5 will end up on the open string, this 1, and then the 3 again ends up being on the open string. That forms this little shape here. There you get at this is the end of the guitar, the nut right there. You get these notes. Here's your 1, here's your 5, here's a 3, and here's another 1. So you have a 1 here, 3, 5, 1, 3, and another 3 up on the 6th string. That forms what we call the C shape. It's a C chord. If you do the same thing with an A, and you start, for example, and you put this note on the open string. So you have an open 5th string, and you look at the A chord, those notes that are in the A chord, if you treat this as the end of the guitar, this note right here at the 2nd fret, 2nd fret, 2nd fret is a root, that's a 5th, that's another root, there's a 3rd, and there's a 5th there. So you see root, 5th, root, 3rd, and 5th. We do the same thing with a G, and put this G, for example, put this little bar right here on the open, nut. This ends up being at the 3rd fret there, this G on the 6th string. And then you get this 3rd right here on the 5th string, 2nd fret, and you got a couple open strings, and then optionally a note on the 2nd string and another note on the 1st string. So that's a root. Look at the intervals. It's a root, a 3rd, a 5th, a root, a 3rd, a 5th, and a root. So here's a root, a 3rd, a 5th, a root, a 3rd, optional 5th, and a root. So on that 2nd string, you can play either of those numbers because either of those numbers are in the chord. The 3 and the 5 are both in the chord. And that's true for all these chords. Now, what happens is if you take those shapes, C, A, G, E, and D, and you stick them on top of each other, going up the neck. So I start on the, for example, 3rd fret, and I play that C shape. And I play the A shape right above it as a bar chord. And I play the G shape right above it, this little bit right from here to here as a bar chord. And I play this next little bit, the E shape, right above it. And then I play right above that, you see the D shape there, as a bar chord. Then I start over on the C shape. You get all those shapes end to end, C, A, G, E, D, and C, as a succession of fingerings that allow you to play the same chord everywhere on the guitar, on the fretboard. So I'm just playing. Here's a C shape, A shape, G shape, E shape, D shape, and C shape, and then it keeps going, C and A, and so on. So this is a really common way to break up these intervals, and if you learn what those numbers are, and kind of learn the scales around them, you can learn how to kind of see each little chunk of the fretboard instead of getting lost in this big C. And it's very often easy to kind of see the shapes on the fretboard. And if you're playing a song, you'll sort of want to play over the bar chords that you're making or the open chords that you're making. And so if you learn the intervals that are around them, again, these are taken from the intervals. If you learn the intervals, if you learn this big full fretboard diagram and kind of associate each little chunk of the fretboard with a chord shape, you'll be able to add fills and not just fills, pick out melodies. You'll be able to pick out scales of any sort around any chord that you're playing. And so it's a really useful way to kind of make this much more practical because you can then play any chord or scale in relation to any other bar chord or fingering that you're familiar with. And so here, this just kind of goes up the fretboard and shows you how to, for example, play the G chord using a G shape at the open position, the C chord using a C shape at the open position, the numbers are written in, and a D chord using a D shape at the open position. And it kind of works up the fretboard going C, A, G, E, D all the way up the fretboard. So you can learn, for example, the open position G, C, and D. Then you can go up to the next little section, which is here at the 3rd fret. This represents your 3rd fret, and so you get we're doing the chords G, C, and D. If I go up to the next section, that's going to be at the 5th fret. That's going to look like this, G, C, and D. And if we go up to the 7th fret, we get these shapes, a C shape, an E shape, and a G shape. And if you go up to the 10th fret, you can get those same things, G, C, and D chord, like that, and then it starts over. So you did all those chords then, all the way up the fretboard, and that's a useful thing, to be able to play every chord in every position. You can do that with any chord. We just did it with G, C, and D there, but they all work the same way. Now here is a much fuller set of arpeggios. Here's a major triad with all of the notes in it. So 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, going up and down based on the E shape. And then the same thing based on a D shape, same thing based on a C shape, and so on. So if you're, for example, on this C shape, you'd be using this C shape, and you have a fifth, a root, third, fifth, root, third, fifth. And that shows you how to play all the arpeggios in the cage shapes. And then you can do the same thing with the minors. There's a little version of the triads. I very often show people how to do the cage shape using these three little shapes. They're very simple, tops of the chords. You can do the same thing with the minors. So you can take, for example, here's an A minor chord. And you can do the same thing in any of the shapes. So for example, if you want to start on the fifth string, you have an A minor shape. Very good. And so learning those arpeggios in their entirety, more than just the strumming chords, lets you find every possible note. And so I go through all of this here, all the seventh chords and so on. And I'm going to work up the fretboard in all these different possible ways so you can find all the root notes. These are just diagrams to learn to be able to play every chord, which obviously is important if you want to be able to do creative music making. You want to be able to play every possible chord in every place on the guitar. And I do the same thing here, now taking the shapes, the chord shapes, and adding notes of the major scale so you can see where these fingerings are, where each of those seventh chord fingerings are together with the notes of the scale. And so there's a lot of reference there, a lot of things to practice. If you really want to learn your chords and scales, you can practice them using these diagrams. But remember, every single thing in here just comes from knowing the formulas in that big 12 fret diagram. It's that 12 fret diagram that you really want to practice and really get to know where the numbers are, because you can build every single bit of this. And this is really the takeaway from this first part of the this theory series for guitar, is that you just need to be able to memorize that big diagram and know the formulas for the scales and the chords that you want to use. It's this big thing here. You want to download this PDF and start memorizing where those are. Just play your major scales up and down. That's the reason why musicians are always heard playing their scales, because they want to be able to find those intervals up and down. I'm going to end this first video here, and then we're going to start doing some really much more interesting things in the next section. We're going to start talking about chord progressions and how you don't just build single scales and single chords, but how you put them together. And those are also based on intervals. We're going to use the same numbers that we did to build the scales, but you get something much more interesting. And actually, what we're going to do here is go through, I have the chord progressions written out for a whole bunch of songs. I think I have like 30 or 40 songs here. So you can see every style of music, every kind of music is basically just a collection of chord patterns that also follow these little interval fingerings. If you learn the interval fingerings, you can learn how to put chords together, and that's where the real interest in music is, learning how to do the chord progressions. So start by learning your intervals, get some scales and chords learned from this lesson. You'll use that for the rest of your life, and then we'll go on to chord progressions next time. Have fun.